Auspicious greetings, everyone. It's good to see everyone joining us for our TBIF. Thank Buddha, it's Friday. My name is Cindy, and I will be the moderator for tonight. We have a wonderful guest tonight, all the way from Taiwan. Our guest is Venerable Sheng. Venerable Sheng is one of the translation team members at the Foguanshan Institute for Humanistic Buddhism at the Foguanshan Monastery, led by Venerable Miao Guang. Venerable has various projects going on. One of the notable projects that she's involved with is the Bodhi Light Tales podcast. Bodhi Light Tales is a Buddhist stories, a collection of Buddhist stories by our teacher, Venerable Master Xing Yun. It is thoughtfully crafted for busy people like us who is seeking mindfulness amidst our busy lives. The podcast, the story is filled with inspirations and wisdoms. We highly recommend to all of you. Just a few logistics to share with everyone right now. For those who are on Zoom, could you please kindly check that your microphone is muted for now. There will be opportunity for all of us to share our comments, our thoughts, or questions with our guests at the end. And also, Venerable Sheng has graciously extended her time just in case if any one of us has more questions or we didn't go through all the questions, she will stay for 5 to 10 minutes after it ends. With no further ado, please help me and welcome our guest speaker, Venerable Sheng, who will share with us using Buddhist stories as skillful means. Welcome, Venerable Sheng.
Thank you, Cindy. I will begin by sharing screen. Oops, not this one. Are you able to see my PowerPoint? Yeah, okay. So I chose this topic kind of like leading on from my previous one. Thank you for the introduction. So one of the projects that I have been working on is the Bodhi Light Tales. So I never thought of myself as a story writer, but since the condition arises that we are launching a podcast, so we use stories written by Venerable Master Xing Yun. But today, I will begin just a little bit of sharing from some of the Buddhist stories. So as we all know from our earliest days, right, stories have always been faithful companions guiding us through life's journey. The power of a good story lies in its ability to touch our hearts, inspiring us to grow and bring positive change to ourselves and the world around us. Stories shape our perspective, and in turn, our perspective shapes who we become. So, do you recall what's the first Buddhist story that you learned? So while preparing for this, I was thinking about what was the very first Buddhist story that I came across. I think many of us begin by learning the life of the Buddha, right? So that's probably one of the first story that we would hear about. Even though I was born into a Buddhist family, I must say I didn't really understand who he was until much later on when I was in university and when I became more in touch with the Buddha's teachings. What I mean by that is because I was born in Malaysia and migrated to Australia when I was 12. So in Malaysia, it's pretty much a little bit like you just go and pray, but there's not a lot of teachings were spoken to us. It's basically a lot of just rituals. So it wasn't until I started to get in touch with Po Guangshan, and also we have a Buddhist association in university, that I started to listen to a lot of the teachings. And I guess the life of the Buddha was always something that, you know, many of us are told when we come across. So this is a question for all of you. You can think about it too, that what are the lessons, right? What are the lessons you learn, like we learn about the Buddha's life? I kind of made an assumption that everyone knows the life of the Buddha, right? So of course, the 4 sights is probably one of the learnings, right? Old age, sickness, death. And the last sight that he saw was a practitioner. So I guess my learning has, I mean, one of the most people are very interested why monastics become monastics, right? So, but I think for me, one of the questions I came to ask myself was, at that time when I was considering renunciation, was I have been in touch with Po Guangshan for like 15 years. And a question that rose in my mind was, what is my purpose? What is the purpose of practicing Buddhism? Because years after years of listening to the teachings and struggling to apply often, but then what is the purpose? So a question that I asked myself at that time was, how many lifetimes would I need to keep repeating the same mistake until I get it? Until I say, okay, enough, I'm going to get out. So if it is not this lifetime, is there a promise for next life? If I don't make use of this lifetime, can I guarantee there will be a next lifetime where I have the condition to listen to the teachings? There's no guarantee. So I think with that question, I realized that then I thought about what's the lesson, what are the teachings of the Buddha? And the Buddha already gave us very clear instructions as to how we can get out of this so-called suffering, right? So those are my lessons, but I guess, you know, at the end, some of you, if you wish to share, more than welcome to hear from you. So, but because we only have 50 minutes, so let's get into some of the stories I have chosen, that I found online. These are not stories from the Bodhi Lighthouse, even though I have 2 stories from the Bodhi Lighthouse, later on. But, one of them, the first story I would like to share with everyone is untying the knots. Okay. So in this story, one morning, the Buddha came into his assembly of the monks. His disciples were sitting and waiting for him. They were puzzled because this was, for the first time, that Buddha had come with something in his hand, a handkerchief. They all looked at the handkerchief. There must be something special in it. Buddha sat on the platform, and rather than speaking to the assembly, he looked at the handkerchief and started tying a few knots in it. 5 knots in all. The whole assembly was simply watching. Then he asked, "Can anybody tell me, is this handkerchief the same as it was before the knots were tied?" One of the disciples said, "This is a tricky question. In a way, the handkerchief is the same because nothing has changed. In a way, it is not the same because these 5 knots have appeared which were not there before." But as far as the inner nature of the handkerchief is concerned, it is the same. But as far as its form is concerned, it is no more the same. The form has changed, although the substance is the same. Buddha said, right, now I want to open these knots. He started stretching both of the ends of the handkerchief away from each other. He asked the disciple, what do you think? By stretching farther, will I be able to open the knots? The disciple said, you will be making the knots even more difficult to open because they will become smaller, more tighter. Buddha said, right. Then I want to ask the last question. What should I do that I can open these knots? How can I untie them again? The disciple said, Bhagavan, I would like first to come close and see how in the first place the knots have been tied. Unless I know how they have been tied, it is difficult for me to suggest any solution. And Buddha said, right, you are blessed because that is the most fundamental question to ask. If you're in a certain fix, the first thing is how you got into it rather than trying to get out of it. Without asking the most fundamental and the primary question, you will make things worse. Now, what is the moral of this story? Right. So, give everyone a couple of minutes to think about this. What did you take from this story? Okay. So while you're thinking, okay. So this particular story is what most of us are doing with our lives. We ask, how can we get out of greed, anger, attachment, jealousy, hatred, possessiveness, and so on? But most of us never ask how, in the first place, I got into them. Buddha's whole approach was first, how you get into the anger. If one can see the entrance, the same door is the exit. No other door is needed. But without knowing the entrance, if one tries to find out the exit, one will get more and more desperate. In the scriptures, what are we looking for? Ready solutions? But we're the ones that create the problem. But then yet we search for the solutions in the scriptures. Why don't we look closely at our problems ourselves and try to understand how do we create them? Why don't we watch when we are creating a certain problem at each moment? One only needs to see how the anger arises, see how one enters into the greed, how one gets hooked onto the attachment, jealousy, and then how it becomes huge like a cloud, enveloping one's whole consciousness, and how one gets lost in it. Okay. So, just a kind of like because of time, and there are many stories I would like to tell many of you. So, I apologize that it will just be like one story after another, but I'll try and pause while give you some time to kind of think about the moral of the story as well for each story. Okay, so the next story that I would also like to share is an elephant trapped in a muddy pond. So a king has many elephants, and one of them was very powerful, obedient, and skilled in fighting. He went with the king in many wars and was the king's favorite. As time passed, the elephant got old, and the king cared for him, no longer taking him to war. One day, the elephant went to a nearby pond to drink water, and his leg got stuck there. The elephant tried and tried, but he couldn't get himself out of the pond. At last, he gave up. Soon, servants noticed the elephant and went towards the pond. The news of the trapped elephant reached the king. Many people gathered there with the king, and many efforts were made to get the elephants out of that muddy pond, but all went in vain. At the same time, the Buddha was passing by that place. People went to him and asked for help. Then the Buddha inquired about the elephant and then inspected the spot. Then he said to the king, "Drums of war should be played around the elephant." The king asked his servants to bring drums, and soon the sound of the drums of war surrounded the elephant. With that, there was a change in the elephant's expression. He stood up and tried to come out of the muddy pond with enthusiasm by himself, and soon he was out. People were surprised to see that and asked the Buddha, "We tried so much, but still we couldn't get him out. And now the elephant came out by himself. How is this possible?" The Buddha said, "There was no shortage of a physical ability. We just needed to motivate him. Because the elephant used to go to war, and he was not able to go there anymore. He lost his desire and will. Using drums helped him get his enthusiasm back." Now, what is your take of the moral of this story? So, in our lives, many times we stop thinking positively and we lose enthusiasm when we get stuck, right? So don't despair. Don't let despair overwhelm you. As long as we keep our head up, right, and think positively, as Venerable Master tells us that we need to think positively when things happen. Okay, so that's this story. Okay, so the third story, I chose this story is a bit related to what I was sharing about earlier on, about my journey into why I have, in the end, decided to take the renunciation. Okay. So in this story, the Buddha told this story while waiting at Jetavana temple about a monk who did not pay attention to his elder's words. The Buddha asked this monk, "Is it true that you do not pay attention to your elder's words?" The Buddha then said, "Not only today, but even in the past. By not listening to elders' advice, you came to ruin." And then the Buddha told a story of the past. Once upon a time, there was a teacher who meditated much and developed his mind. Gradually, his fame spread. Those who wished to be guided by a wise man came to hear him. Considering what he said to be wise indeed, 500 decided to become his followers. One of these 500, who considered his teachings to be wise, was a certain pet lover. In fact, he loved pets so much that there was no animal he did not wish to keep as a pet. So one day he came upon a cute little poisonous snake who was searching for food. He decided he would make an excellent pet. So he made a little bamboo cage to keep him in it, right, when he had to leave home alone. Well, leave him alone. So the other followers called the little snake Bamboo. Because he was so fond of this pet, they called him the pet lover, like Bamboo's father. Before long, the teacher heard that one of his followers was keeping a poisonous snake as a pet. He called him and asked if this was true. Bamboo's father said, "Yes, master, I love him like my own child." The wise teacher said, "It is not safe to keep to live with a poisonous snake. Therefore, I advise you to let him go for your own good. But Bamboo's father thought he knew better. He replied, this little one is my son. He wouldn't bite me. I can't give him up and leave all alone. The teacher warned him, then surely this little one will be the death of you. But the follower did not heed his master's warning. Later on, all 500 of the teacher's followers went on a trip to collect fresh fruits. Bamboo's father left his son locked up in the bamboo cage. Since there were many fruits to collect, it was several days before they returned. Bamboo's father realized that the poor Bamboo had not eaten the whole time he was away. So he opened the cage to let him out to find food. But when he reached inside, his son bit his hand. Having been neglected for all that time, Bamboo was angry as well as hungry. Since he was only a snake, he didn't know anything about poison. But his father should have known better. After all, he had been warned by the very teacher he himself considered wise. Within minutes of being bitten, Bamboo's father dropped dead. The Buddha said, Bamboo's father in those days was this monk today. And the teacher was the Buddha himself. So the moral of this story is there is no benefit in following a teacher if you don't listen to what he says, right? So like I was saying, I asked myself, how many times do I have to hear the Buddha's teachings before I can get it and actually put into practice? So here we are listening to Dharma talk after Dharma talk. How much of it that we are able to apply? I guess since this is Buddhist stories, as Skillful means, so through these stories, I hope that we can take on certain lessons. But these lessons, more importantly, that when things happen or when things go wrong, so-called wrong, or when things don't go as how I would like it, at least we can draw upon these stories and apply it. At least we can make sense of what's going on. Like the previous story, untying the knot. Untying the knot, I like that story because I think it is true that many of us focus on how should I get out of this instead of focusing on how did I get in the first place. And as the moral says, if we are aware of at each moment, how did I slowly get in? Just as the Buddha was tying the knot, he didn't just tie it. There was one thing led to the other as he's tying them. Just like how we get into troubles, there is always something happens. There's a sequence of events that happens, and then we get ourselves into trouble. So it didn't just happen without a reason. So with these three stories, the second story of the stuck elephant, I think it's easy for us when we try and then we just go, forget it, and then we give up. And we think that's it. There's no more hope in it. I'm just going to just die here, or like I'm just gonna just wait for a magic moment that will come, somebody will come and save us. But in actual fact, we are the one that needs to pick ourselves up often, right? So these three stories, I hope you enjoyed it. So the next one that I would like to turn the attention a little bit to Venerable Master, because I think, as I was saying at the beginning, when we learn about the Buddha's teaching, we learn about the life of the Buddha and his teachings, there is lessons in it. And I think, I'm not sure if many of you know Venerable Master's story, but in case you don't, I'm just going to tell you briefly. So we always hear about Venerable Master's story, as how he renounced at the age of 12. So when he was young, it was during wartime, and he lost his father during that wartime. And in search of his father with his mom, he met a monk, and the monk said to him, "Hey, little one, do you want to renounce?" And he's like, "Okay." And his mom was just like, "No, you don't know what you're talking about. You have no idea." And he said, "But I promise. So I have to keep my promise." So, but then the only reason why his mom agreed for him to renounce in the end was because of his education. So the monk who is his master, later on Master Zikai, said to his mom, "I will educate him if you allow him to follow me." And indeed, so he renounced at the age of 12. But at the age of 12, in Buddhist college, he was learning with people who were in their teens, like maybe 18 or even 20. So as a young kid, he was very curious. He would always look around, and he spoke about how one story where he got slapped by his teacher saying, "Stop looking around." But as a curious kid, he says, "Okay, if I don't look around, what can I do?" He says, shut your eyes. So as he shut his eyes, he says, but then he got bored. And then the teacher says, "Look within. Look in your heart." And he's like looking down and thinking, "But I can't see my heart." But as time go by, he started to look and look. He saw all the negative emotions within: anger, jealousy, greed. And as time go by, he looked and looked, and he realized that that's the learning. And I always recall this story of how from young he was taught to shut his eyes. So we know that as he grew older, he had diabetes. So he's pretty much 90% blind. He couldn't really see much. But for those that have met him, we always wonder that how could he? It's almost as if he could see. Because if you watch him, how he reached for the microphone, how he reached for the tissue, how he moved the cup that's kind of getting in his way, how he moved the microphone, it's as if he could see. So I think it's from his learning as a young kid that shut your eyes, that actually eventually he was able to see with his mind, with his heart, not through his physical eyes. So Venerable Master is also known as somebody who's very good at storytelling. He always includes stories in his talks. So the Bodhi Light tells many of the stories that actually all of the stories have been inspired by him. So I would like to tell you this particular one. Okay. This one is the Happy Mom washing machine. Okay, so I'm not sure if you recall this because this has been a while, but I'm just gonna tell you in brief about this story. So the Happy Mom washing machine is a story of a mother who a widow who is trying to raise two kids, Isabel and Brian. And of course, Isabel and Brian being still young, they always look forward to mom taking them out to a park. So they always ask mom, when are you going to take us to the park? And then mom will always say, one day when I finish my work. She has to work 2 jobs to make sure they have enough money. So, and they know that one day it's just not going to come. So then Brian says to Isabel, do you think there's a way we can help Mom out? And then Isabel thought about it and said, well, maybe we can, buy Mom a washing machine because she does the laundry for people. So they said, oh, that's a good idea. So we'll start saving up money. So they started saving their pocket money, their coins. So eventually they saved up 2 bottles. So then Brian goes to the shop and trying to buy a washing machine. And the shopkeeper asked him, hey, little ones, what are you looking for? He said, oh, a washing machine. Okay. So then he started explaining, we have this model, we have this model. So then he realized even for the cheapest one, he was short of $30. And very disappointed, he says, I'm sorry, I don't have enough money. So he packed up all his coins and he was about to leave. And the shopkeeper asked him, may I know why you want to buy a washing machine? Then Brian told the story about how Mom works very hard and we just want to help her out so that she can spend more time with us. So the shopkeeper was very touched by Brian's story and then asked him for his home address. And without thinking much, Brian just gave the man his address. So a week later, somebody knocked on the door and his mom opened the door. And here comes the washing machine. And the mom says, I think you got the wrong address. We didn't buy this. And he's like, no, I got the right address. This is for you. And the mom says, no, we can't accept this. We didn't buy this. And then the shopkeeper told the mom what happened, that how Brian came to the shop and wanting to buy the washing machine. But because of his story, he was inspired by Brian to name this particular model the Happy Mom washing machine. So as a way to thank him, he gave him an envelope of $2,000 and also the model of the washing machine. So in this story, Venerable Master says, actually, what he was trying to reflect on is the idea of building a pure land on earth. So we know in Buddhist terms, the Saha world in Buddhism, the word Saha means to bear and to endure. In other words, it is a world in which people must endure suffering. It is a world in contrast with a pure land. The Saha world is an impure land spoiled by earthly desires and illusions. The question is, how do we turn the Saha world into a pure land? In the Buddhist sutras, pure land means to purify the land. It means taking action to improve the environment and build a better world and society. In this story, the love of a caring mother, trying her best to provide her kids with a better life, means she is like a bodhisattva who takes action to transform a humble home into a pure land for her children. The son and daughter also acted by saving money to provide a washing machine for their mother. This story demonstrates that the true heritage of Buddhism is found in the willing spirit to transform the world we live in for the better. At the end of the story, the owner's generosity embodies a wonderful world. His offerings turn the family's poor situation into a pure land, overflowing with joy. If we can spread loving kindness to all, such as when we offer prayers for world peace and the happiness of all people, then we are making the Saha world itself into a pure land. When we move forward with this purpose, we are, in the words of a sutra, propagating the law, teaching, and changing the Saha world. Buddhists carry out these practices of a bodhisattva as missionaries of the Buddha. Let us make our community our country and the whole world shine brightly as the land of eternally tranquil light. Just as Venerable Master Sheng says, by helping each other, every place becomes a paradise. By respecting neighbors, every place becomes a pure land. Paradise is in my home. The pure land is in my mind. So I'm going to pause here. When I worked on this story, I had huge struggle because it went from a washing machine, then Venerable Master talked about pure land on earth. I thought, okay, so what is the connection here? So but you know, when we think about it, it's true. I think he was very skillful in trying to get us to see that, you know, when we talk about the idea of pure land, it's not another place. You know, we talk about the Western pure land, the Amitabha's pure land. But Venerable Master is trying to tell us that we can make our place, our home, our workplace, wherever you are, a pure place, a pure land, by doing good, by treating each other with kindness, right? As shown in this story. The children caring for mom, the mom's love for the children, the shopkeeper, the owner who actually just did that little bit to help them out. So we all, each of us can make that little difference with what we have. So it makes sense after, you know, I thought about it. But while I was working on it, the gap seems to be so huge from a washing machine to pure land. But it is actually very skillful, I thought, which I learned from Venerable Master. So the next story I would like to also share is hurtful speech. Okay. So, okay, I'm going to just go back. Sorry. Give me a minute. So, okay. So for the stories I share here today are in this Bodhi Light Tales blogspot. We have all the stories here for you to pick from. So you're more than welcome after today that you can actually take a look at other stories if you want. Okay. So this story I would like to share is called Hurtful Speech. Okay. So, okay, wait. Okay. Once upon a time, the Buddha was staying at the Jetavana monastery. With him was a group of disciples, of his disciples known as the 6 bhikkhus, namely Nanda, Upananda, Kaladine, Chanda, Asvaka, and Punavasu. These 6 were the unruly disciples who disobeyed the rules and regulations and often broke the precepts and constantly engaged in bad behavior with their friends. One day, the 6 bhikkhus got into an argument while trying to come up with the 10 ways to mock these who were well behaved. And one of them said, "No, this should be number 10. And then the other one says, "No, you're wrong. It should be number 9. It doesn't matter. Just hurry up and get this list done." Another bhikkhu said. Soon the argument escalated into a shouting match with the bhikkhus yelling over each other. When the Buddha heard of this, he gathered the 6 bhikkhus. When they arrived before the Buddha, they bowed and paid their respects. The Buddha then spoke. "Bhikkhus, have you heard of the story about a cow and a Brahman?" The 6 bhikkhus looked puzzled and shook their heads. The Buddha continued, In the past, in the city of Texela was ruled by King Gandhara. There lived a family of breeders with a cow who had just been given birth to a calf. The calf was adopted by a Brahmin who named her Joyful. The Brahmin raised the calf in his daughter's garden. Every day he brought Joyful food and took care of her. Adored by the Brahmin, Joyful grew up. One day, Joyful thought, the Brahmin has taken good care of me. I want to pay his respect. I want to pay his kindness. Now that I'm a strong cow, most likely I'm the strongest. I can show everyone my true strength. When Joyful saw the Brahmin that afternoon, she said, Brahmin, now that I've grown to be strong, why don't you bet on me? Please go to the elder of the Breeders' Guild and tell him that I can pull 100 cards. The Brahmin asks, are you sure? He says, yes, you can bet $1,000 on me. I can do it, Joyful assured. The next day, Brahmin went to see the elder. The elder asked, what can I do for you? Then the Brahmin asked, do you know who owns the strongest cow in the city? Well, there are a few people I know I can think of who would say their cow is the strongest. But you know what? None of them are as strong as mine, the elder replied. Then the Brahmin said, I have a cow that is strong enough to pull 100 cards. The elder exclaimed, how is that possible? And the Brahmin said proudly, I'm sure of it. How about we bet on it? The elder, still in disbelief that a cow would be able to pull such a weight, but then agreed to make a bet. On the next day, on the day of the contest, the Brahmin changed 100 cards loaded with sands and stones. He then bathed Joyful, fed her special rice, and even made a necklace with flowers and placed it over her neck, reminding her, please don't disappoint me. Then he yoked Joyful to the first cart. When the elder arrived, the Brahmin waved to him, got onto the lead cart and said, we are ready. Okay, let's begin, the elder said. The Brahmin raised the whip and yelled, pull, cheater, pull harder, cheater. Upon hearing these words, Joyful was shocked. She thought, I'm not a cheater. Why would the Brahmin call me that? Dazed and unhappy, Joyful's limbs were frozen solid. She lost all her will to pull the carts even an inch. Seeing the cow not moving at all, the elder clapped his hand and said to the Brahmin, well, I guess you lied about your cow. You lost. Defeated, the Brahmin handed his money to the elder. After that, Joyful was brought back to her shed. For the rest of the day, the Brahmin was depressed. That evening, Joyful walked up to him and asked, why are you lying there doing nothing? And the Brahmin replied sadly, we lost $1,000. How could I possibly sleep well tonight? Brahmin, you've cared for me since I was a calf. In all that time, have I ever broken anything? Have I ever made a mess or give you a reason to be unhappy with me? Joyful asked. The Brahmin replied, shaking his head, no, not at all. Then, why did you call me a cheater today? Joyful asked. Without waiting for an answer, she continued, you called me names. It is your fault, not mine, that we lost the bet. Your insults really hurt me. You did not believe in me. To win, you must believe I can do it. Realizing what he has done, the Brahmin was speechless. After a moment of silence, Joyful nudged the Brahmin and said, please go to the elder again. This time, bet $2,000. And the Brahmin was interrupted by Joyful when he was saying, then Joyful said, yes, I'm sure, but this time please do not call me a cheater, Joyful said firmly. And the Brahmin agreed. The next day, the Brahmin went to see the elder, and this time they agreed on a bet of $2,000. With everything set up just as the first bet, the Brahmin got on the lead card, but this time he patted Joyful lightly and said, go, champion, go. When she heard those words, Joyful pulled as hard as fast as she could. Very quickly, she crossed the finish line. The elder applauded and shouted, your cow is amazing. He happily handed the $2,000 to the Brahmin. Many spectators has gathered to cheer and crowded around Joyful, applauding and praising her. This is the story of the cow and the Brahmin. The Buddha paused for a moment and concluded, dear bhikkhus, nobody likes harsh speech, not even animals. Do you all see the importance of right speech? Hurtful words not only hurt others, but yourselves as well. With their heads down, the 6 bhikkhus nodded. Afterwards, the Buddha reminded all his disciples to refrain from hurtful speech. He then set the rules that they were to observe their speech by speaking honestly and compassionately. So what is the moral of this story? In this story, the Buddha taught the bhikkhus to guard their speech and be considerate when talking to others. When the Brahmin spoke with harsh words, Joyful felt hurt, which affected her performance. However, when the Brahmin spoke with faith and encouragement, Joyful was able to thrive. We must be mindful of our speech and how it impacts others. We often must be mindful of our speech and how it impacts others. We often make mistakes with our speech, not only hurting others, but also ourselves. Therefore, many of the precepts set by the Buddha are related to speech. In order to guide us in speaking kind words, before speaking, we must stop and ask ourselves, is what I'm about to say true, helpful, kind, and timely? So that's the moral for this story. Everyone has a story. So what is your story in learning Buddhism? So I leave you with that as we come to the end of what I want to share here. I guess I have at the beginning share a little bit about my journey and how I have come to learn the Buddha's teachings through the life of the Buddha, and inspired by Venerable Master's story as a young kid who, over a promise, he took his renunciation. And Bodhisattva's stories have been a skillful means for me in deepening my understanding of the teachings too. I guess I leave you with this question to ponder about: what is your story as you learn Buddhism? So thank you for listening, and we now open the floor for sharing or any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable. And as Venerable mentions, now the floor is open for all of us, whether we're on Zoom or in person. For those who are in person, please kindly go to the hot seat to raise your comments, raise your questions, or share your thoughts or comments. And also for those on Zoom, please go ahead to speak. I will not refer to the chat box because of my technical glitches happening on my end. I apologize for that. But we're open, and this is live questions. This is our chance to share our stories, how we got to learn Buddhism, like Venerable just mentions. What is your story in your path now to get to where you are today? Please do share with us. Thank you.
This is Ina in Florida, and Venerable, thank you so much. What I was thinking about in all of this, and it has to do also with how my life in Buddhism is that all of the stories are about journey. You think of the Buddha. We read as a book study the biography that Venerable Master wrote of the Buddha, and what we were all impressed with was the journey. The journey, not just inside, but also the feet, going places, experiencing new things, going through difficult times, and that without journey, it's just words on a paper. And that even the little kids getting the washer for mom, it was a journey beyond what is to what needed to be to make her and the family happier. So I'm leaving with the word journey. And at the end, you had that path, and that also fits very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ina. Yes, I do agree that it is. Stories take us on a journey. It does feel like that. I guess like I said, everyone has a story, and wherever that your story, I guess we're still journeying. Yeah, we're still on the journey. Right. So it is true that when I was working on these stories by Venerable Master, and often I think it has taken me on a journey. Each story has taken me on different journeys, and I think he has a way of really telling the story in a way to get us to think about a particular aspect of life, a particular issue as such, or a theme that we are trying to address about life. And I think each story highlights a particular aspect of what we are faced, what we encounter in life. And that's also my aim, is to bring that out at the end of each story. But the happy mom washing machine, it took me a long time to make that connection, but I did make it in the end. So I guess that's also my journey when I made that connection. Yeah. Thank you. Somebody's at the hot seat.
Yeah. Hi, Venerable.
Hello.
Denny from San Diego. I wanted to get back to your very first story. And you were zeroing in on anger and overcoming anger to get out of rebirth and to rectify our behaviors here. And you mentioned greed as well, but I was thinking of the three poisons, and the other one is ignorance. And to me, of the three poisons, that would be the toughest, I think, to realize that it's an affliction that you have because you're ignorant. And so how because of your ignorance, how do you get to the point where you realize that you're ignorant? And, when you're angry, ultimately you get to the point where you realize, you've gone over the top. Same with greed. You might eat too much, for example, and suffer the consequences. But ignorance, to me, would be a real challenge. And I thought, well, maybe education. But in this day, it seems like we have all kinds of alternative facts. So I'm asking a very difficult question. How do you overcome ignorance? I was thinking in particular of racism, for example. If you're born in a racist culture, how can you get beyond that and realize that you've been exposed to racism and you might be a racist yourself. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. You know, it's true. Ignorance is a difficult one because obviously I'm ignorant, so I won't be able to see it, right? So ignorance is often described like being in a dark room. When you're in a pitch dark room, you can't see what's in it, right? But then if there was a candle lit, suddenly you see parts of the room. Then you realize, okay, actually, I see what's there. So often, this is an analogy of how we describe the Dharma, the teachings. It's kind of that candle that gives you that little glimpse into what you have been blinded by. But I think it is true that it's easier to see anger. It's easier to see greed. But ignorance kind of is the backbone of, I like to think of it like the backbone of our anger and greed. It's in it. So sometimes ignorance is also described like the wind. You know, we can't see the wind, but we can feel effects of the wind. You know, when the wind blows, the breeze, you can feel it. Right? So the wind, even though you can't see it, just like ignorance, you can't see it, but you can feel the effects of it. Right? We can feel the effects of our ignorance. It's when we suffer. When you get yourself into a lot of suffering and pain, I'm talking about more internal. Sometimes it's, of course, there's the physical, but often what really gets us is the emotional pain. So in practicing Buddhism, that's why we wouldn't advise people to begin with ignorance, but we begin by working with our anger because that's something is right there. It's present. It's very easy for us, and greed as well. But anger is probably that's the magic of practicing Buddhism. When you focus on dealing or handling, if you find a way to handle your emotion or anger, having to deal with anger, it almost seems like the same method could apply for greed. And eventually there will be many more moments, as we call the aha moments, you know. We go, what? Suddenly you see something. Suddenly you just realize that, wow, I have never really thought of it this way. But suddenly you just, you know, I guess you have these moments too. Sometimes you walk past a place, if you walk past it every day, and then suddenly you just think, has this always been here? And they say, yes, it's been there for years. And you think, well, why didn't I see that before? But I saw it today. Why is it that I see it only now? The conditions, what we call the causes and conditions right now is right for me to see this. So sometimes we have to kind of recognize that there is many events leading us to come to realize something. So the way I think of working with our ignorance is like a work in progress. Every little bit that we do is working towards realizing that ignorance. So it's not this big, but it's the little small things that we realize. If today you can notice what makes you angry, if you can notice what you're greedy for, what are you craving for, what are you desiring for, what are you unhappy about? If we can see that each moment, each time we come to realize, I think all of that little realizations is what leads to unfolding that ignorance. That's the way I see it.
Yeah. Thank you, Venerable. And you've inspired me with your talk to go back to Bodhi Light Tales.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Venerable, and thank you to everyone for joining us today for our monthly Thank Buddha It's Friday. I would like to invite Venerable Miaozhang for some closing comments. And as I mentioned earlier, if you still have a few more comments or questions for our Venerable Sheng, please do stay for 5 or 10 minutes after. Venerable Miaozhang, I will share my screen for the dedications of merits.
Okay, so I would like to thank Venerable Sheng again for her time to share with us all the insightful Buddhist stories. I know she still have many stories to share with us. And because of the time, we only had the chance to listen with a few, but the numbers is not the main issue. The main focus here is what we can take back, what we can take away from today's lecture. So, and of course, I would like to thank everyone for attending today. And I hope that you learned a little bit and turn on the lights in the dark room eventually. That is our aim and goal. So before we conclude, let us join our palms as we dedicate merit. May kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity pervade all worlds. May we cherish and build affinities to benefit all beings. May Chan, Pure Land, and precepts inspire equality and patience. May our humility and gratitude give rise to great vows. So we hope that everyone stays safe, and I'll see you next time. And thank you again, and hope you have a wonderful days, weeks, and years ahead. Amitabha. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.